The stars were brighter than I'd ever seen. Pinpricks of light piercing the velvet sky above the Appalachian Trail. I was 19, breathless from the climb, and terrified of what I'd just realized about my best friend, Caleb. One glance at him, his sweat-dampened hair curling against his neck, his laugh echoing through the pines, and my heart betrayed me in ways I wasn't ready to face. We'd been inseparable since middle school. Two misfits in a small Virginia town where everyone knew your business before you did. Caleb was the reckless one, always dragging me into adventures, sneaking into abandoned barns, racing bikes down dirt roads, or, like now, convincing me to hike a chunk of the Appalachian Trail for our first summer after high school. I was the planner, the one who packed extra water and checked the weather 3 times before we left. But no amount of planning could have prepared me for this trip. It was our 3rd night, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. We'd pitched our tent in a clearing, the kind of spot that felt like it belonged in a painting. Caleb was sprawled by the fire, poking at it with a stick, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "you ever think about what's next? Like, after this summer?" His green eyes caught the firelight, and I swear my stomach flipped. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "College, I guess. You're the one who's always talking about running off to California." I forced a laugh, but my chest felt tight. The truth was, I couldn't imagine my life without him, and that scared me more than the dark woods around us. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, staring at the stars. "What if we didn't go back?" he said finally. "What if we just kept going? You and me." His words hung in the air, heavy with something I couldn't name. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat closed up. The fire crackled, and I busied myself with adjusting the tent stakes, avoiding his gaze. That night, we crawled into the tent, our sleeping bags barely fitting in the cramped space. The air was warm, and I could feel the heat of his body next to mine. I lay there, staring at the nylon ceiling, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. Caleb was quiet, too quiet, and I wondered if he was asleep. Then, out of nowhere, his hand brushed mine. Not an accident, not a casual bump. His fingers lingered, curling around mine, and my entire world tilted. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I need to tell you something." I froze. My pulse raced, a mix of fear and something else, something I'd been shoving down for years. I turned my head, and in the dim light filtering through the tent, I saw his face. His eyes were wide, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. Caleb, the guy who'd once jumped off a quarry cliff on a dare, looked like he was about to break. "What is it?" I managed, my voice hoarse. He swallowed hard, his grip on my hand tightening. I'm in love with you." The words hit me like a punch. My mind blanked, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. Call me best friend, the guy I'd spent every summer with, the one who knew me better than anyone was in love with me. And the worst part, I knew, deep down, I felt the same, but I wasn't ready to admit it. Not to him, not to myself. I pulled my hand away, my chest heaving. "Caleb, I don't know what to say." My voice cracked, and I hated how weak it sounded. His face fell, and the hurt in his eyes was like a knife in my gut. He turned away, curling into his sleeping bag, and the silence between us was louder than any words. The rest of the night, I lay awake, replaying his confession in my head. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I was scared, but that I felt it too. But fear kept me frozen. Fear of what it meant, of what our small town would think, of losing the only person who'd ever made me feel whole. By morning, Caleb was acting like nothing had happened, joking about the trail and our next campsite. But I saw the strain in his smile, the way he avoided my eyes. We hiked in silence for most of the day, the weight of his words pressing down on us. I kept stealing glances at him, noticing things I'd tried to ignore for years, the way his shoulders moved when he walked, the way his laugh could pull me out of any funk. I was falling apart, torn between what I wanted and what I thought I should want. That evening, we stopped at a rocky overlook, the valley sprawling below us like a sea of green. Caleb dropped his pack and turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Ethan, we need to talk about last night." My stomach dropped. I wanted to run, to pretend it never happened. But I couldn't. Not when he was looking at me like that, like I held his entire world in my hands. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time." He nodded, but the sadness in his eyes was unbearable. "I get it," he said, "but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. I've been in love with you since we were 15. Ethan. And I thought, maybe you felt something too." His words broke something in me. I wanted to tell him he was right, that I'd been in love with him for just as long. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, mute, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting us in shadow. The next few days on the trail were a blur of tension and unspoken truths. Caleb and I moved like ghosts, our usual banter replaced by curt exchanges about maps and water supplies. Every time our eyes met, I felt the weight of his confession, a secret that hung between us like a storm cloud ready to burst. I hated myself for not saying anything to ease the pain I saw in his face. But every time I opened my mouth, fear clamped it shut. We were deep in the Shenandoah Valley now, the trail winding through dense forests and past waterfalls that roared like they were trying to drown out my thoughts. Caleb was ahead, his backpack bouncing with each step, and I couldn't stop staring at him. I'd always noticed him, how could I not? He was all sharp edges and wild energy, the kind of person who made you feel alive just by being near him. But now, every glance felt like a confession I wasn't ready to make. That night, we set up camp near a rushing stream, the sound of water filling the silence between us. Caleb was quieter than usual. His usual fire dimmed. I wanted to fix it, to go back to how things were before he'd said those words. But I didn't know how. As we ate our meager dinner of instant noodles, I caught him staring at the flames, his jaw tight. "Caleb," I started, my voice shaky. He looked up, and for a moment, I thought I saw hope in his eyes. But I chickened out, muttering something about checking the tent instead. I could feel his disappointment like a physical weight as I walked away. Inside the tent, I sat with my head in my hands, trying to sort through the mess in my mind. I'd grown up in a town where different wasn't a compliment. I'd heard the whispers about kids who didn't fit in, the ones who got shunned or worse. I'd spent years convincing myself I was just like everyone else, that my feelings for Caleb were just friendship, nothing more. But now, with his words echoing in my head. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I was in love with him, and it terrified me. When Caleb finally crawled into the tent, the air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. He didn't look at me, just unzipped his sleeping bag and lay down, his back to me. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between us, but my hands stayed glued to my sides. "Ethan," he said suddenly, his voice low and rough. "I'm not sorry I told you. I meant it. But I hate this distance between us now." My heart ached at his words. "I don't want it either," I admitted, my voice barely audible. I don't know how to do this. Caleb, I don't know what it means for us." He turned to face me then, his eyes searching mine. "It means we're honest with each other," he said. "It means we stop pretending. I've spent years hiding how I feel, and I can't do it anymore. Not with you." His words cut through me, exposing every fear I'd tried to bury. I wanted to tell him everything, how I'd spent nights memorizing the way he smiled, how I'd dreamed of a life where we didn't have to hide. But the thought of saying it out loud, of making it real, felt like stepping off a cliff. Instead, I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling as they found his. He froze, his breath catching, and for a moment, we just sat there, hands clasped in the dark. It wasn't a confession. Not yet. But it was something. A start. The next morning, things felt different, not fixed, but lighter. Caleb didn't push me to talk, and I was grateful for it. We hiked through a stretch of trail lined with wildflowers, their colors vivid against the green. For the first time in days, he smiled at me, a real smile, and my heart stuttered. But the lightness didn't last. That afternoon, we ran into a group of hikers, 3 guys in their 20s, loud and rough around the edges. They were friendly at first, sharing their water and joking about the trail. But something about the way they looked at us, the way their eyes lingered on our clasped hands when we thought no one was watching, set my nerves on edge. "Hey, you two together or what?" one of them asked, his tone half joking, half challenging. Caleb's hand tightened in mine, but he didn't let go. "Just friends," I said quickly, the words tasting like ash. Caleb's grip loosened, and I felt him pull away, not just physically but emotionally. The hikers laughed, oblivious to the tension, and moved on. But the damage was done. That night, Caleb barely spoke. He sat by the fire, his knees pulled to his chest, and I could see the hurt in every line of his body. I wanted to apologize, to tell him I hadn't meant it, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I sat across from him, the fire casting shadows that felt like they were swallowing us whole. "I'm not ashamed of who I am," he said finally, his voice steady but laced with pain. "I thought you knew that." "I do," I said, desperate to fix it. I'm scared. Caleb, I don't know how to be this person yet." He looked at me then, his eyes softer but still guarded. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said, "but you have to decide if you're in this with me. Because I can't keep waiting for you to catch up." His words were a challenge, one I wasn't sure I could meet. But as I lay in the tent that night, his steady breathing beside me, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't lose him. Not now. Not ever. The trail stretched on, each step a reminder of the choice I hadn't made. Caleb's words from the night before echoed in my head. You have to decide if you're in this with me. I wanted to be. More than anything. But the fear was a living thing, clawing at my chest. Growing up in our town, I'd seen what happened to people who stepped out of line. Whispers turned to shouts, and acceptance turned to isolation. I wasn't sure I was strong enough to face that. But losing Caleb, that was a pain I couldn't imagine surviving. We hiked through a misty morning, the air cool and heavy with the scent of rain. Caleb was quieter now, his usual energy subdued. I missed his laugh, the way it used to fill the silence. I missed us. As we navigated a rocky incline, I caught him glancing at me, his expression unreadable. I wanted to say something, to bridge the gap, but every word felt inadequate. By midday, the sky opened up, drenching us in seconds. We scrambled to set up the tent under a cluster of pines, laughing despite ourselves as water soaked through our clothes. For a moment, it felt like old times and Caleb against the world. But as we crawled inside, shaking off the rain, the weight of our unspoken truths settled back in. You okay? He asked, his voice soft as he peeled off his wet jacket. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and I fought the urge to brush it away. Yeah, I lied, my eyes fixed on the tent floor. Just cold. He didn't push, but I could feel his gaze, heavy with questions. We sat in silence, the rain drumming against the nylon, and I knew I couldn't keep dodging this. Not if I wanted to keep him. Caleb, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared. Not of you, but of everything else. What people will think. What it means for my family. For my future. He looked at me, his eyes steady. I get it, he said. I've been scared too. But I can't keep hiding who I am, Ethan. And I don't want to hide how I feel about you. His honesty was a blade, cutting through my defenses. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I'd been in love with him for years. But the words were trapped behind years of fear. Instead, I reached for his hand again, my fingers brushing his. This time, he didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time, the rain a steady rhythm outside. His hand was warm in mine, and for the first time, I let myself imagine what it would be like to stop running from this. To be with him, not just in secret moments, but in the open, where the world could see. The rain slowed by evening, and we ventured out to dry our gear. The forest was alive with the sound of dripping water and chirping birds, a stark contrast to the storm in my heart. Caleb was more talkative now, pointing out a deer in the distance. But I could still feel the distance between us. I had to make a choice, and soon. That night, as we lay in the tent, I turned to him. Caleb, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. I don't know if I'm ready for everything, but I know I don't want to lose you. I think I love you too. The words hung in the air, raw and terrifying. Caleb's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. Then he smiled, a real smile, and leaned closer. That's enough for now, he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. We'll figure it out together. For the first time in days, I slept soundly, his warmth beside me a promise of something new. But the world outside the tent was still waiting, and I knew our challenges were far from over. The next morning, we woke to a clear sky, the trail stretching ahead like a metaphor for our future, uncertain but full of possibility. We didn't talk about my confession, but there was a new ease between us, a quiet understanding. As we hiked, Caleb's shoulder brushed mine, and I didn't pull away. But the trail wasn't done testing us. That afternoon, we stumbled across a campsite littered with trash-empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and a torn backpack. It was the kind of mess that screamed trouble, and my gut twisted. We should keep moving, I said, scanning the trees. Caleb nodded. But before we could leave, we heard voices loud, slurred, and getting closer. The same group of hikers we'd met days ago emerged from the woods, their eyes glassy and their smiles too wide. "Well, look who it is," one of them said, his gaze flicking between us. "The friends." Caleb stiffened beside me, his hand brushing mine as if to steady us both. "Let's go," he muttered. But the hikers blocked our path, their laughter sharp and cruel. "What's the rush?" the leader said, stepping closer. "You two got something to hide." My heart pounded, fear mixing with anger. I wanted to protect Caleb, to stand up for us. But the words wouldn't come. And then, before I could stop him, Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady. "We don't owe you an explanation," he said. "Back off." The air crackled with tension, and for a moment, I thought it might turn ugly. But the hikers just laughed, muttering slurs as they stumbled away. Caleb's shoulders were tense, his fists clenched, and I knew this wasn't over, not for them, and not for us. The encounter with the hikers left a bruise on the day, one we couldn't shake. Caleb was quiet as we hiked away from the trashed campsite, his jaw tight and his eyes fixed on the trail. I wanted to say something, to erase the ugliness of those words, but my own fear held me back. I'd frozen when it mattered, letting Caleb face them alone, and the guilt gnawed at me. We stopped early that evening, too drained to push further. The clearing we chose was tucked beside a quiet stream, the water glinting in the fading light. Caleb dropped his pack and started setting up the tent, his movements sharp and mechanical. I could feel the distance growing again, and I hated it. "Caleb," I said, stepping closer. "I'm sorry about earlier. I should have said something." He paused, his hand still on the tent stakes. "It's fine," he said, but his voice was flat. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," I said, my voice breaking. "I should have had your back." He looked at me then, his eyes soft but weary. "I don't need you to fight my battles, Ethan. I just need you to be with me. Really with me." His words hit hard, a reminder of the choice I was still avoiding. I nodded, unable to find the right words, and we finished setting up camp in silence. The fire we built was small, barely enough to warm us, but it gave me something to focus on as I wrestled with my thoughts. That night, in the tent, I couldn't sleep. Caleb was close, his breathing steady, but I could sense the tension still lingering. I turned to face him, the moonlight filtering through the tent, casting soft shadows on his face. He looked peaceful, but I knew he was hurting, and it was my fault. "Caleb," I whispered, not sure if he was awake. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at me, waiting. "I meant what I said last night. I love you. And I'm done being scared of it. His breath caught. And for a moment, he just stared at me. Then he reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. And I leaned into his touch. You mean that? He asked, his voice barely audible. Yeah, I said, my heart pounding. I'm in. All the way. He smiled, a real smile, and pulled me closer. Our foreheads touched, and for the first time, I let myself feel everything: the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his breath, the certainty that this was right. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But that moment was enough. It was a promise. The next few days were different. There was a new rhythm to our steps, a quiet joy that hadn't been there before. We laughed again, teased each other about who could carry the heavier pack, and shared stories about what we wanted from life. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future with him, not just as friends, but as something more. But the world wasn't done with us. On the 6th day, we reached a small trail town, a cluster of shops and diners catering to hikers. We were low on supplies, so we headed to a general store, our hands brushing as we walked. Inside, the clerk, an older man with a weathered face, watched us closely, his eyes narrowing when Caleb laughed and slung an arm around my shoulders. Careful, he muttered as we paid for our supplies. Folks around here don't take kindly to certain types. Caleb's arm stiffened, but he didn't pull away. Good thing we're just passing through, he said, his voice calm but edged with defiance. I wanted to say something, to stand up for us, but my throat closed up. Again. Outside, Caleb's smile was gone. You okay? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. No, he said, his eyes distant. I'm tired. Ethan. Tired of people looking at me like I'm something to fix. I thought you were starting to get that. I am, I said, desperate to make him understand. I'm trying. Caleb. I need time to figure out how to be brave like you. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't want you to be like me. I just want you to be you. The real you. His words stayed with me as we hiked back to the trail, the weight of them heavier than my pack. I knew he was right. I had to stop hiding, not just from the world, but from myself. But knowing and doing were two different things, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the fight that lay ahead. That night, as we lay in the tent, I reached for his hand again. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice steady. I'm with you, Caleb. No matter what. He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining in the dark. That's all I needed to hear, he said, and for the first time in days, I felt like we were on the same path. The trail was starting to feel like home, each step a small victory over the fears I'd carried for so long. Caleb and I were finding our rhythm again, our hands brushing as we walked, our laughter filling the quiet moments. But the world outside our bubble was never far away, and I knew we couldn't stay on the trail forever. Sooner or later, we'd have to face reality: our town, our families, and the truth we were only beginning to embrace. We were a week into the hike now, the mountains stretching endlessly before us. The air was crisp, the leaves just starting to turn, and I felt alive in a way I never had before. Caleb was beside me, pointing out a hawk circling overhead, his smile bright enough to rival the sun. I wanted to freeze this moment, to hold on to the way he made me feel safe, seen, and whole. But the trail had other plans. That afternoon, we came across a narrow bridge over a rushing river, the water churning below. It was rickety, the kind of thing you'd see in an adventure movie, and my stomach twisted at the sight. Caleb, of course, was unfazed, striding across like it was nothing. I followed, my heart in my throat, and halfway across, one of the planks gave way. I stumbled, my pack pulling me backward, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to fall. Then Caleb's hand was on mine, pulling me forward with a strength I didn't know he had. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady, and I believed him. We made it to the other side, my legs shaking as I collapsed onto the grass. Caleb knelt beside me, his hand still on my arm. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Yeah," I said, breathless. "Thanks to you." He grinned, but there was something serious in his expression. "I'll always have your back, Ethan. You know that, right?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I know. And I've got yours." For the rest of the day, his words stayed with me, a reminder of the promise we'd made to each other. But promises were easy in the wilderness, where the only judgment came from the trees. The real test would come when we went home. That night, we camped on a ridge with a view of the stars, the kind of sky that made you feel small and infinite at the same time. Caleb was quiet, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "What happens when we go back?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. Not a good one. "We figure it out," I said, hoping it sounded more confident than I felt. "Together." He nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers, and for a moment, the world felt right. The next morning, we woke to the sound of voices hikers, but not the ones we'd met before. These were a family, a mom and dad with 2 kids, their laughter echoing through the trees. They waved as they passed, friendly and oblivious, and I felt a pang of envy. Their world seemed so simple, so free of the weight Caleb and I carried. As we packed up, Caleb was quieter than usual, his movements slow. "You okay?" I asked, zipping up my pack. He hesitated, then met my eyes. "I'm scared, Ethan. Not of us, but of what happens when people know. My dad, he's not like yours. He won't understand." My heart sank. I knew Caleb's dad gruff, traditional, the kind of man who thought feelings were a sign of weakness. My own parents weren't perfect, but they'd always been more open, more willing to listen. "We'll face it together," I said, echoing my words from the night before. "Whatever happens." He nodded, but the fear in his eyes didn't fade. We hiked in silence for most of the day, the weight of the future pressing down on us. I wanted to be the strong one for once, to show him I could be brave, but I was just as scared as he was. That evening, we reached a small shelter, a wooden lean-to built for hikers. It was empty, and we decided to stay, grateful for a break from the tent. As we ate, Caleb opened up, telling me stories I'd never heard about the nights he'd spent wondering if he was broken, about the fear that had kept him silent for so long. I listened, my heart aching for the boy who'd been carrying that weight alone. "I never thought I'd find someone who got it," he said, his voice soft. "Not until you." I reached for him then, pulling him into a hug. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. But it was everything we needed, proof that we weren't alone. As we sat there, the stars above us, I knew I'd do whatever it took to protect this. To protect us. The trail was winding down, both literally and figuratively. We were nearing the end of our planned route. A small trailhead in Northern Virginia where we'd parked Caleb's beat-up truck. Each step felt heavier. Not from exhaustion, but from the looming reality of what came next. The wilderness had been our sanctuary, a place where we could be us without fear. But the world beyond the trees was waiting, and I wasn't sure we were ready. Caleb was quieter now, his usual spark dimmed by the weight of what lay ahead. I could see it in the way he carried himself, the way his eyes lingered on the horizon. I wanted to fix it, to make him laugh like he used to, but I didn't know how. Instead, I stayed close, letting our shoulders brush as we walked, a silent reminder that I was here. That afternoon, we stopped at a lookout point, the valley sprawling below us like a painting. Caleb dropped his pack and sat on a rock, his knees pulled to his chest. "I don't want this to end," he said, his voice barely audible. "Out here, it's just us. Back home, it's everyone else." I sat beside him, my heart aching. "We'll make it work," I said, trying to sound sure. "We're stronger than they are." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "Are we?" I didn't have an answer. Not really. But I took his hand, squeezing it tight. "We have to be." That night, we shared the tent again, the space feeling smaller than ever. Caleb was close, his warmth a comfort against the chill. I could feel the tension in him, the fear of what waited for us. I wanted to say something, to promise him everything would be okay. But words felt hollow. Instead, I turned to face him, our faces inches apart in the dark. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice trembling. "If this goes wrong, if they try to tear us apart, promise me you won't let them." My throat tightened. "I promise," I said, and I meant it. I'd fight for him, for us, no matter what it took. He leaned closer, and this time, we didn't stop. Our lips met, tentative at first, then desperate, like we were trying to hold on to this moment before the world could take it away. It was my first kiss, and it was everything terrifying, exhilarating, and so right it hurt. When we pulled apart, his eyes were shining, and I knew mine were too. "I love you," he said, his voice steady now. "No matter what happens." "I love you too," I said, and for the first time, the words felt easy, like they'd been waiting to be said. The next day, we hiked in a kind of quiet bliss, our hands brushing, our smiles secret but real. But the closer we got to the trailhead, the more reality crept in. We talked about what we'd do, how we'd tell our families, how we'd face our town. Caleb was braver than me, his jaw set with determination, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I wanted to be that brave, for him. That evening, we reached the trailhead, Caleb's truck waiting like a relic from another life. We stood there, staring at it, neither of us ready to leave the trail behind. "This is it," Caleb said, his voice low. No going back now. I nodded, my heart pounding. Together, I said, taking his hand. He squeezed it, his smile small but real. Together. We drove back in silence, the hum of the engine a stark contrast to the quiet of the woods. Our town loomed ahead, a cluster of familiar streets and judging eyes. I knew what waited for Uzmi parents' questions, Caleb's dad's anger, the whispers that would follow us everywhere. But as I looked at Caleb, his profile sharp against the fading light, I knew I'd face it all for him. When we pulled into my driveway, my mom was waiting, her arms crossed, and her face a mix of worry and relief. "You're back," she said, pulling me into a hug. Her eyes flicked to Caleb, and I saw the question there, the one I wasn't ready to answer. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "We're back." Caleb stayed quiet, his hand brushing mine as we grabbed our packs. My mom didn't say anything, but I could feel her watching us, piecing things together. I knew we'd have to talk soon, but for now, I just wanted to hold on to this moment, to the feeling of Caleb beside me. Home felt different, like a pair of shoes that didn't fit anymore. The familiar streets of our town, the diner where we'd spent countless afternoons, the church steeple looming over everything, it all felt smaller, sharper. After the vastness of the trail, Caleb and I had crossed a line in those mountains, and there was no one crossing it. But standing in my driveway, his hand brushing mine one last time before he headed home, I felt the weight of what came next. My mom didn't ask questions that night, but I could see them in her eyes. She'd always been good at reading me, and I knew she sensed something had changed. Over dinner, she talked about mundane things, work, the neighbor's new dog, but her glances were heavy with curiosity. I wanted to tell her, to spill everything about Caleb and me, but the word stuck. I wasn't ready to face her reaction. Not yet. Caleb's house was a different story. I didn't see him for 2 days after we got back, and each hour felt like a lifetime. When he finally texted, his message was short: "Need to talk. Meet me at the quarry." The quarry was our spot, a hidden place where we'd spent summers swimming and dreaming. It was where I'd first realized I loved him, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself then. I got there at dusk, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Caleb was waiting, sitting on a rock overlooking the water, his shoulders hunched. He looked up when he heard me, and the pain in his eyes stopped me cold. "What happened?" I asked, sitting beside him. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the water. "I told my dad," he said finally, his voice rough. "About us." My stomach dropped. "What did he say?" Caleb laughed, a bitter sound. "What do you think?" He called me a disgrace, said I was confused, that I needed to fix myself. He told me to get out. I felt like I'd been punched. "He kicked you out?" "For now," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "I'm staying at my aunt's. But Ethan, I don't know if I can go back." I reached for his hand, my heart racing. "You don't have to. You can stay with me. My parents will understand." He shook his head. "You don't know that. And I don't want to drag you into this mess." "You're not dragging me anywhere," I said, my voice fierce. "I'm in this with you. Remember?" He looked at me, his eyes searching, and I saw the flicker of hope there. You sure? He asked, his voice barely audible. More than anything, I said, and I meant it. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight as the world seemed to spin around us. I didn't know how we'd make it work, but I knew I'd fight for it. The next day, I told my mom. It wasn't planned, I just blurted it out over breakfast, my hands shaking as I gripped my coffee mug. Mom, I'm in love with Caleb, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. For a moment, I thought she'd be angry, but then she set her fork down and reached for my hand. Okay, she said, her voice steady. Tell me about it. I did. I told her about the trail, about Caleb's confession, about the way he made me feel like I could be myself. She listened, her eyes soft, and when I finished, she hugged me. I just want you to be happy, she said. And if Caleb makes you happy, then that's enough for me. It wasn't perfect. Me Dad was quieter, processing it in his own way, but it was a start. I knew we'd have to face the town, the whispers, the judgment. But with my mom's support, I felt a little braver. Caleb moved in with us a few days later, his aunt's place too far to be practical. My parents welcomed him, though I could see the strain in their smiles. They were trying, and that was more than I could have hoped for. But the town wasn't as kind. We heard the whispers at the diner, saw the looks at the gas station. Caleb held his head high, but I could see the toll it took. One night, as we lay in my bed, our first time sharing a space that wasn't a tent, I turned to him. Are we going to make it? I asked, my voice small. He smiled, his hand finding mine. We already are, he said. We're here, aren't we? The weeks that followed were a mix of hope and hardship. Caleb and I were together, really together, and that felt like a miracle. But our town wasn't ready for us. The whispers turned to outright comments, the kind that cut deeper than I'd expected. At the diner, a group of guys we'd gone to high school with stared as we walked in, their laughter sharp and cruel. At church, the pastor's sermon started to feel pointed, his words about traditional values landing like blows. Caleb took it better than I did. He'd always been stronger, his defiance a shield against the world. But I could see the cracks late at night. When he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him crying, his shoulders shaking. I'd hold him, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But it was all I had to offer. My parents were our anchor. My mom started inviting Caleb to family dinners, treating him like one of us. My dad was slower to come around. But one evening, he pulled me aside. I don't understand everything, he said, his voice gruff. But I see how you look at him. And I know love when I see it. His words gave me hope, a reminder that not everyone would turn away. But Caleb's dad was another story. He hadn't spoken to Caleb since that night, and every unanswered call was a wound. I wanted to fix it, to make his dad see the son he was losing. But I didn't know how. One afternoon, we went back to the quarry, our old spot. The water was calm, reflecting the autumn sky. And for a moment, it felt like we were back on the trail, just the two of us. Caleb sat on the same rock as before, his knees pulled to his chest. I keep thinking about that night in the tent, he said, his voice soft. The night I told you. I was so scared you'd hate me. I could never hate you. I said, sitting beside him. You changed everything. Caleb. You made me brave. He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I don't feel brave, he admitted. I feel like I'm fighting a war I didn't sign up for. Then we'll fight it together, I said, taking his hand. You and me. He looked at me, his eyes shining. You mean that? More than anything, I said, and I pulled him into a kiss. Right there in the open, where anyone could see. It was reckless, maybe even stupid, but it felt like a victory. The next day, we made a plan. We'd leave town. Not forever, but for a while. College was starting soon, and we'd chosen a school in a bigger city. A place where we could be ourselves without fear. It wasn't running away, it was choosing a life where we could breathe. Packing up was harder than I'd expected. My room was full of memories, photos of me and Caleb as kids. Tickets from concerts we'd snuck into. A rock he'd given me from our first hike. I kept them all. A reminder of where we'd started and where we were going. Caleb's dad showed up the day before we left. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock, and my heart sank when I saw him through the window. Caleb went to the door, his shoulders tense, and I stayed close, ready to step in. I don't understand you, his dad said, his voice low. But you're my son. And I don't want to lose you. Caleb's eyes filled with tears, but he stood tall. I'm still me. Dad. I just love someone you didn't expect. His dad didn't say anything for a long moment, then nodded. I'll try, he said, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We left the next morning. Our packs lighter than they'd been on the trail, but our hearts heavier. As we drove away, Caleb's hand in mine, I looked back at our town, small and fading in the rearview mirror. It wasn't home anymore. Not really. But it was where we'd found each other. And that was enough. Years later, we'd look back on that trip as the moment everything changed. The night in the tent, when Caleb's confession broke open my world, was the start of something bigger than us. It was messy, painful, and beautiful, but it was ours. And as we built a life together through college, through new cities, through every challenge the world threw at us, we carried that night with us. A reminder that love, real love, was worth fighting for.